Thomas Bennett walked slowly down Elm Street, his wooden walking stick tapping against the sidewalk with each step. The 72-year-old man moved with the same dignity he had carried for all his years as a headmaster. His grey beard was neat and clean, and his clothes were pressed perfectly. Just like always, the evening was quiet in Millbrook. Thomas had lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. He knew every house, every family, every corner. The children he had once taught were now grown up with children of their own. Everyone in the area knew Mr. Bennett as the kind teacher who had helped their kids learn to read and write. Thomas was coming home from Miller's corner shop. He had bought milk and bread for his breakfast tomorrow, just like he did every Tuesday evening. Mrs. Miller had asked about his son David, who was a soldier serving far away from home. Thomas had smiled when he talked about David. His son would be coming home soon for a short visit. The shopping bag felt light in Thomas's free hand as he walked the same path he had taken hundreds of times before. The street lights were just beginning to turn on as the sun set behind the houses. Thomas enjoyed these evening walks. They gave him time to think about his day and look forward to tomorrow. But tonight would be different from all the other nights. A police car was driving slowly through the neighborhood. Inside, two officers were looking round for anything unusual. Officer Jackson was young, maybe 25 years old. He had only been a policeman for 2 years. But he thought he knew everything about his job. His partner, Officer Harris, was not much older and had the same attitude. Jackson saw Thomas walking ahead of them. Something about the old man bothered him, though he could not say exactly what it was. Maybe it was the slow way Thomas walked, or maybe it was just that Jackson was having a bad day and wanted to find trouble somewhere. "Look at that old man," Jackson said to his partner, walking pretty slow. "Isn't he look suspicious to me?" Harris looked at Thomas through the car window. He saw an elderly man walking home with groceries. But Harris was quick to agree with whatever Jackson said. "Yeah, let's check him out. You never know what people are up to these days." The police car pulled up behind Thomas, and the officers got out. Thomas heard the car doors slam shut. He turned round slowly, the way older people do when they do not want to hurt their backs. His eyes showed no fear or worry. He was curious about why the police wanted to talk to him, but he was not afraid. "Good evening, officers," Thomas said in his polite voice. "How can I help you?" Officer Jackson walked toward Thomas with quick, heavy steps. His face looked angry, though Thomas had done nothing wrong. "What are you doing out here?" Jackson demanded. His voice was loud and unfriendly. Thomas was surprised by the officer's tone, but he remained calm. He had dealt with difficult people before during his 40 years as a teacher. "Just walking home from the shop, sir," Thomas replied. He held up his small bag of groceries to show the officers. "I live just round the corner on Elm Street." Officer Harris came closer too. Both men stood too close to Thomas, making him feel uncomfortable. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Harris said. This was not true, but he said it anyway. Thomas nodded politely. He understood that police officers had important work to do, and he wanted to be helpful. "I understand you're doing your job, officers. I'm Thomas Bennett. I taught at Millbrook Primary School for 40 years. Many people round here know me." The fact that Thomas seemed like a respectable person made Officer Jackson even more angry. Jackson did not like it when people talked about how important or well-known they were. It made him feel small and unimportant. "I don't care who you think you are," Jackson said, his voice getting louder. "Show me some identification, right now." Thomas felt confused by the officer's anger. but he did not want to cause any trouble. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket to get his wallet. He moved carefully because he had heard that police officers sometimes got nervous when people moved too quickly. "Of course, officer," Thomas said. "Here's my identification." Thomas held out his driver's license with a steady hand. Officer Jackson grabbed it roughly, almost pulling it from Thomas's fingers. Jackson looked at the license for a few seconds, then looked back at Thomas with unfriendly eyes. "What's in the bag?" Jackson demanded. Thomas looked down at his groceries. "Just milk and bread, sir. You're welcome to look if you need to. We don't need your permission," Officer Harris said rudely, before Thomas could say anything else. Officer Harris grabbed the grocery bag from Thomas's hand. He turned the bag upside down, and the milk carton and bread fell onto the sidewalk. The milk carton hit the ground and split open, sending white liquid spreading across the pavement. Thomas watched sadly as his food was wasted. He was not angry, but he felt hurt by the unnecessary treatment. He had been nothing but polite and helpful, yet the officers were treating him like a criminal. "This seems like a lot of trouble over nothing," Thomas said gently. "Could I please have your badge numbers? I'd like to make sure this interaction is properly documented." Those words changed everything. Officer Jackson's face turned red with anger. David Bennett was sitting with his army friends at a small cafe near their military base. They were laughing and telling stories about their day when David's phone started ringing. He looked at the screen and saw the name Mrs. Patterson. His smile disappeared right away. Mrs. Patterson was his father's neighbor back home. She was a kind old lady who had lived next door to David's family for many years. But Mrs. Patterson never called David unless something was very wrong. She knew he was busy with his military duties, so she only contacted him when there was an emergency. David quickly answered the phone. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. Is everything okay?" "David, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, and her voice sounded worried and sad. "I'm so sorry to call you, but it's about your father. He's been hurt." David felt his stomach drop. His father Thomas was the strongest, kindest man David knew. Thomas had raised David all by himself after David's mother died when David was only 12 years old, even though Thomas worked long hours as a school headmaster. He never missed any of David's school plays or football games. He was always there when David needed him. "What happened?" David asked quickly. "Is Dad in the hospital? Is he badly hurt?" No. He's not in the hospital," Mrs. Patterson said. "He's here at my house right now. But David, some police officers came to our neighborhood tonight. They pushed your father down on the street. They broke his walking stick. He has some bruises, and he's very shaken up." David closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. His military training had taught him to think clearly even in bad situations. He needed to get information first, then decide what to do. "Tell me exactly what happened. Is Dad badly injured?" "He's moving slowly, and I can see some bruises on his arms," Mrs. Patterson explained. "But David, I think what hurt him most was the way those officers treated him. They were so rude and mean to him. Your father is such a good man. He didn't deserve to be treated like that." David felt anger building up inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Can you put my father on the phone, please?" David heard some shuffling sounds, and then he heard his father's voice. But Thomas sounded different than usual. His voice seemed older and more tired. "Hello, son," Thomas said quietly. "Dad." "Are you okay? Please tell me what happened to you." Thomas told David the whole story. He spoke in his usual calm way, but David could hear that his father's voice was shaking a little bit. When Thomas described how the police officers had dumped his groceries on the ground and broken his walking stick, David felt very angry. But he tried not to let his father hear the anger in his voice. The walking stick was very special to Thomas. David's mother had given it to Thomas on his 60th birthday. Just 2 years before she died, Thomas had carried that stick everywhere for 12 years. It was not just something to help him walk. It was a memory of the woman he had loved. "Dad, I'm coming home tonight," David said firmly. "Son, you don't need to leave your important work just because of an old man's problems," Thomas replied. "Dad, you taught me that family is the most important thing in life. You taught me to stand up for what's right. I'm coming home, and we're going to deal with this together." After David hung up the phone, he went straight to find his commanding officer, Captain Williams. David had been a soldier for many years and had served in 3 different wars. Captain Williams respected David and knew he was a good soldier who never caused trouble. David explained what had happened to his father. Captain Williams listened carefully and then said, "Take emergency leave. Bennett, family comes first. Your father raised a good soldier, so I know he raised a good son too. Go home and do what's right." David packed his things quickly and got in his car. He had a long drive ahead of him, but he didn't care. He drove through the night, thinking about his father and remembering all the important lessons Thomas had taught him. Thomas had always been David's hero and his guide for how to live a good life after David's mother died. Thomas had to work very hard to take care of David and also do his job as a school headmaster. But Thomas never complained, and he never let David feel like he was alone. Thomas had taught David that being strong didn't mean being tough or loud or mean to other people. Real strength meant standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves. It meant treating everyone with respect, no matter who they were or where they came from. Now someone had hurt and disrespected the man who had taught David everything important about life. As David drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook early in the morning, he remembered many happy times from his childhood. He remembered learning to ride his bicycle on these same streets, with his father running beside him to make sure he didn't fall. He remembered the day he told his father he wanted to join the army. Thomas had been proud of David's decision, but also worried. "Promise me something, son," Thomas had said that day. "No matter where you go or what you see, always remember that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Even when other people forget that, you must remember." David had made that promise to his father, and he had kept it through all his years as a soldier. The next morning, David sat at the old kitchen table with his father. This was the same table where they had eaten breakfast together every day when David was growing up. But today felt very different from all those happy mornings long ago. Thomas was moving very slowly. David watched as his father carefully reached for his teacup, and he could see that Thomas was in pain. When Thomas tried to stand up, he moved like an old man who was afraid of falling. He kept touching his left side where he had hit the ground the night before. But what worried David most was not his father's physical pain. It was something else he saw in Thomas's face. His father's eyes had always been bright and full of life. Thomas had always walked and talked with confidence, like a man who knew his place in the world and was comfortable with who he was. Now that confidence was gone, for the first time in his life, David saw uncertainty in his father's eyes. Thomas looked like a man who was no longer sure of himself or his place in the world. "Dad, I need you to tell me the whole story again," David said. "Tell me every detail you can remember." Thomas told the story once more. His voice was quiet but steady, as he described what the police officers had said and done. David listened carefully and wrote down everything his father told him. His years in the army had taught him how to gather information and document evidence. You said the neighbors saw what happened. David asked. Mrs. Patterson saw it from her window, Thomas replied. She said that young Emma, who lives across the street, was recording it with her phone. David felt his heart beat faster. She was recording it. Yes, but I don't know how much of it she was able to record. After they finished breakfast, David walked across the street to talk to Emma. She was a college student who was home for the summer vacation. When David knocked on the door and explained who he was, Emma looked nervous and worried. I don't know if I should get involved in this, Emma said. I don't want to cause any trouble. David spoke to her gently. Emma, this is about more than just my father. What if this same thing happens to someone else's father or grandfather? We have a chance to make sure it doesn't happen again. Emma thought about what David had said. Then she took out her phone and showed him the video she had recorded. David watched the screen in complete silence. He saw his father politely asking the officers for their badge numbers. He saw the officers getting angry and aggressive. He saw them push his 72-year-old father to the ground. Watching the video made David angrier than he had ever been, even during his time fighting in wars. But he remembered his father's wise words. True strength is not about being the toughest or the loudest person. Emma, would you be willing to share this video if it could help protect other people? David asked. Emma nodded her head. Mr. Bennett taught my little brother how to read when he was having trouble in school. Mr. Bennett never gave up on any of us kids. Yes, I will help. David spent the rest of the day walking around the neighborhood and talking to other people who lived there. He visited Mrs. Patterson, who had helped his father the night before. He talked to Mr. Murphy, who lived in the house next door. He spoke with the Johnson family, who lived at the corner of the street. One by one, the neighbors told David their own stories about problems with the police. Mr. Murphy said that police officers had stopped him 3 times in the past year. Each time, they said he looked suspicious just because he was walking his dog in his own neighborhood. Mrs. Johnson told David that police cars had followed her teenage son twice while he was riding his bicycle to school. If all these things have been happening, why hasn't anyone reported them? David asked. Murphy looked sad as he answered. Who would believe us? We're just ordinary people. And even if someone did believe us, what would really change? That evening, David sat with his father in their living room. The broken walking stick was lying on the coffee table between them. The stick was now into pieces, but it had once been whole and strong. Just like his father's confidence. Dad, I've been thinking about something you always taught me. David said, you used to tell me that good people have a responsibility to speak up when they see something wrong happening. Thomas nodded slowly. Yes, I did teach you that. Well, something wrong was done to you, and it's been done to our neighbors too. We have a choice now. Dad, we can stay quiet and hope it doesn't happen again. Or we can speak up and try to make things better. Thomas looked tired and discouraged. Son, I'm just one old man who is going to listen to anything I have to say. David took out his phone and showed his father Emma's video. Dad, look at this. This video has been shared more than 1,000 times since this morning. People are watching it. They're upset about what happened to you. But more than that, they're inspired by the way you handled the situation. Thomas watched the video with sad eyes. I look so weak and helpless in that video. No, Dad, David said firmly. You don't look weak. You look dignified. even when those officers were treating you badly. You never lost your dignity. That's why people are responding to this video. That's why this matters. David showed his father the comments that people had written about the video. 3 weeks after the incident, the community center on Oak Street was packed with people. David had never seen so many people in that building before. He looked round the room and saw neighbors from his street, people who had been his father's, students many years ago, local shop owners, and even people from other neighborhoods who had heard about what happened to Thomas Bennett Dot at the front of the room. Thomas sat in a chair wearing his best dark suit. For the first time since the night he was hurt, his back was straight and his head was held high with pride. In his hands, he held a beautiful new walking stick. It had been carved by Robert Chen, a man who worked with wood and made furniture. Robert had been one of Thomas's students 30 years ago. When he was just a little boy, David stood up to speak to the crowd. His voice was strong and clear so everyone could hear him. My father always taught me that respect is something you earn by doing good things, not something you demand by using force, David said. 3 weeks ago, two police officers forgot that important lesson. They forgot that the man they pushed to the ground was somebody's father, somebody's neighbor, and somebody's friend. David pointed to all the people in the room. But look round. This room right now. Look at all these people who remember who Thomas Bennett really is. A woman named Margaret Williams stood up from her seat. She was now a successful doctor who helped sick people get better. Mr. Bennett, you probably don't remember me, but you were my teacher in 3rd grade. He said, I was the very shy girl who was always afraid to talk in class. You never forced me to speak. But you made our classroom feel safe. Because of you, I finally found the courage to use my voice. That's the kind of person you are. Someone who helps other people find their courage. After Margaret sat down, other people began to stand up and tell their own stories about Thomas. There were people who had become teachers themselves because Thomas had inspired them. There were parents whose children had been helped by Thomas when they were struggling in school. There were neighbors who remembered small acts of kindness that Thomas had done for them over the years. Sarah Miller stood up with her teenage daughter beside her. Mr. Bennett, you changed my whole life when I was 7 years old. She said, I couldn't read very well, and I felt stupid compared to the other kids. But you stayed after school with me every single day for months. You never made me feel bad about myself. And you never gave up on me. Because of your help, I became a librarian when I grew up. Now my daughter is going to university next year because I was able to help her with her reading. Love, that started with your kindness too. Me, David watched his father's face as he listened to all these stories. The sadness and uncertainty that had been in Thomas's eyes for 3 weeks was slowly disappearing. It was being replaced by something much stronger, the knowledge that his life had made a real difference. In too many people. Detective Inspector James Harrison was also at the meeting. He was a police officer, but he was a fair and honest man who believed in doing the right thing. He stood up to speak to the crowd. I want everyone here to know that what happened to Mr. Bennett was completely wrong. He said, it does not represent the values of our police force or our community. We have finished investigating what happened, and both officers who hurt Mr. Bennett will be punished for their actions. The detective continued talking, but more importantly, we are starting new training programs for police officers. We are also creating new ways for the community to watch over the police and make sure they do their jobs properly. Mr. Bennett's courage in speaking up about what happened has created positive changes that will help everyone. After the meeting ended, David and Thomas walked slowly through their neighborhood together. The new walking stick made a rhythmic tapping sound against the sidewalk. The sound was familiar because it was like Thomas's old stick, but it was also different because this stick represented a new beginning. "How do you feel, Dad?" David asked as they walked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "I feel proud," he said finally. "I'm not proud that those officers hurt me, but I'm proud of what we did about it afterward. I'm proud of our neighbors who supported us, and I'm proud of you for coming home to help me." They stopped walking when they reached Miller's corner shop, the same place where Thomas had been buying groceries the night he was hurt. Mr. Miller, who owned the shop, came outside when he saw them. "Mr. Bennett, I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop," Mr. Miller said. "What happened to you that night was terrible and wrong. I'm sorry I didn't come outside to help you when it was happening." Thomas reached out and shook Mr. Miller's hand in a friendly way. "Mr. Miller, we cannot change what happened in the past, but we can choose how we move forward into the future. I choose to move forward with forgiveness and hope, not with anger and bitterness." As they continued their walk home, David noticed something important about his father. Thomas's confident posture had returned, but now it was even stronger than before. 6 months had passed since that terrible night, and now Thomas Bennett stood at the front of the same community center where he had spoken before. But today was very different. The room was decorated with beautiful flowers, and it was filled with the happy sounds of people talking and laughing together. Today was the first Community Dignity Day, a special celebration to honor people who stand up for what is right and to celebrate the good values that make a community strong. David sat in the front row, wearing his best military uniform with all his medals and ribbons. His face was shining with pride as he watched his father get ready to speak to the crowd. The past 6 months had brought many wonderful changes to their neighborhood. The police department had started new programs to build better relationships with the community. A neighborhood watch group had been created, not to cause problems, but to help residents and police officers work together better. Thomas looked out at all the familiar faces in the crowd. Detective Inspector Harrison was sitting there with his wife and children. He had become a good friend and was working hard to make the police department better. Emma, the young college student who had recorded the incident with her phone, was also there. She was now volunteering with an organization that helps protect people's civil rights. Many of Thomas's former students had traveled from far away just to be there for this special day. "My friends and neighbors," Thomas began, his voice strong and clear so everyone could hear him. 6 months ago, I had one of the worst experiences of my entire life. I was knocked down, both physically and emotionally. My walking stick was broken. My dignity was attacked, and my faith in justice was badly shaken. Thomas paused for a moment and looked down at his beautiful new walking stick. Then looked back up at all the people in the room. "But today, I stand here before you not as someone who was hurt, but as someone who has seen the amazing power of community. When I was knocked down, all of you helped me stand back up. When my walking stick was broken, Robert made me a new one with his own hands. When my faith was shaken, all of you reminded me what is truly worth believing in." Thomas pointed to his son David. "My son taught me that we always have choices in how we respond when bad things happen to us. We can choose to respond with anger and bitterness, or we can choose to respond with determination and hope. We chose hope. And just look at what wonderful things have happened because of that choice." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter. "I want to read something to you that I received just this week. It's a letter from Officer Michael Thompson, a young policeman who just graduated from the police academy." Thomas put on his reading glasses and began to read. "Dear Mr. Bennett, I heard your story during our training classes. Your example of keeping your dignity even when you were treated unfairly inspired me to become the kind of police officer who protects and serves everyone with respect. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. When Thomas finished reading the letter, everyone in the room began clapping loudly. The sound of applause filled the community center. Thomas waited for the clapping to stop before he continued, speaking. You see, what happened to me could have made me bitter and angry. It could have made me afraid to leave my house or trust anyone. Instead, it made me feel proud of my son, proud of my neighbors, and proud of my community. Together, we turned a moment of darkness into a light that is still shining brightly today. David stood up from his seat and walked to the front of the room to join his father. Ladies and gentlemen, David said, I have served 3 tours of duty as a soldier overseas, and I have seen courage in many different forms. But the greatest courage I have ever witnessed was my father's decision to stand up after being knocked down, to speak the truth after being silenced, and to choose hope after experiencing hatred and injustice. Thomas put his arm round his son's shoulders, just like he had done so many times when David was a little boy. My son came home to help his old father when I was in trouble, but he ended up helping our entire community. That's what happens when good people decide to stand together and support each other. After the ceremony ended, many people came up to Thomas and David to shake their hands and thank them. Children who had been Thomas's students brought their own children to meet the teacher who had made such a difference in their lives. Police officers came to thank them for helping to make the police department better. Neighbors hugged them and told them how proud they were to live in the same community. As the afternoon sun began to set, Thomas and David walked home together through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The sound of Thomas's new walking stick tapping against the sidewalk was like music to David's ears. It was the sound of his father's strength and dignity returning. Dad, are you happy with how everything turned out? David asked. Thomas smiled and looked round at the neighborhood he loved so much. Son, I learned something very important through all of this. I learned that when bad things happen to good people, we have the power to turn those bad things into something beautiful and meaningful. That's exactly what we did.